Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for another episode of the Jason's Take On. We're here talking about bold customer success and have a lot of great conversations around that. I am joined today by my co-host, Jason Noble, based over in London. Say hello, Jason.
Hello, Jason. Hi there, everyone. Really excited to be here for another episode and another great guest.
Absolutely. And today we're very excited to have Manuel Harnisch here joining us today. So welcome, Manuel. A little bit of background. Manuel has grown and led several CS teams, frequently at companies that have very technical products built for technical users. And he's really had extensive experience in this area. And we're excited to have him here because many SaaS companies that we talk with, their technical staffs or in their product team and building for the B2B space, they're often building functionality that's intended for non-technical users, such as front office staff and sales folks, all that great stuff. But we don't often talk about what it takes to make customers with very technical products successful and what that means for customer success folks. So we're going to change that today by looking at how to do customer success when you have a very technical product with very technical users. So Manuel, thanks for being here today, and say hello, and please just give everyone a quick overview of your professional background, your career, and any experience you've had building and leading CS teams.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And hello, Jason and Jason. I call this the Jason Squared podcast. So this is very exciting. Very happy to be here. And yeah, so my background is I've been in the tech space for the better part of 20 years now. Most recently, built and led a CS function at a company called People Data Labs. Prior to that, built one and led one at Kentic and spent about 9 years at Sev1. And this is the old cell days when you still had on-prem appliances and you would put software on and ship that out and then it get installed. And back then we called what we do now post-sales and support, right? These days it's all about success because it's all about recurring revenues. Yeah, that's a little bit about my career and what I've been doing. And so far so good. I'm still enjoying it and I'm hoping to do it a couple more decades here. But yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us. So let's just jump right in, since so many of the products that you've worked with and teams you've built, it really has been extremely technical products with technical experts as your users. How would you compare that to building CS for more of a front office type product or more business type users that have less technical expertise? How do you approach it differently, and what are some of the big challenges?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing and really the differentiator is you have a lot more skeptics when it comes to technical products that you have to overcome. Every company I've been a part of over the last decade or so has always sold to engineers, whether they were network engineers or they were developers like we're doing now at FOSSA. And having those types of personalities means that you have to overcome a much larger barrier with regards to technical expertise, technical trust, and really getting those folks on board. A lot of times the buyers are not really the people that will end up using or implementing either, right? So that's another sort of dichotomy. And really it starts with having people on your team as the vendor that can speak at the customer's level, at the engineer's level, and then build that rapport, rather than just being, say, a customer success manager that sort of muddles through, runs the meetings, but doesn't really get deep. And so it's all about building that trust, that relationship, and then being able to deliver value on a continuous basis. A lot of times CS teams nowadays, they focus on the QBRs, they focus on the presentations, and I think those are still valuable and those can still be important. But if you have a very technical product, you got to make sure that you can deliver the technical value first and foremost before you go to the QBRs.
When you've got technical teams, how do you get that customer success mentality and way of thinking on them? Because quite often it's not something that's very natural to a developer. It's not the background they've got. When they're an engineer, it's a very different mindset. How do you go about educating and training them and helping them get aligned with what customer success really is and what we need to be doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think as with anything in life, the answer is it depends on the situation, but you end up having to be less direct in some ways with folks like that, because we come in and say, hey, you have to do it this way, and that's because we say it's going to be that way, you're probably going to run into a brick wall relatively quickly. Engineers don't like to be told what to do from the get-go. You have to earn their trust and you have to earn that relationship. And so one of the things, and we were really successful at doing this at Kentic, was to bring in folks that had done the job of the customer in the past, right? Like they were peering coordinators, they ran large scale networks and so forth. And so they could immediately get a base level of trust established because they spoke the same language, right? Like they understood the acronyms, the short text and so forth, and they could get that established like right away. And then from there, it was just a matter of, hey, I actually know what your job looks like. I've done your job. Let me show you some of the things that have worked for me in the past. And also let me help avoid some of the mistakes that I made, because that's one of the things engineers don't like to necessarily learn all the lessons the hard way. Some of them do, but for the most part, they're open to, if somebody comes in with a base level of understanding and they've done the job before, they're willing to listen a lot more closely in that scenario. So those are some tactics and some strategies that I think are working really well.
You found it, does it take time? Have you found it quite quick to do that? Or is it something that takes a long time to do and has varied degrees of success?
I think it depends on, again, it depends on the personalities that are going to be involved early on. I actually think that a lot of times you can set yourself up for success in that regards early on by involving the people that will ultimately work with you post-sales in the final closing stages. And that's something that we'll be doing a lot more here at FASA as I get up to speed and build out the team and the function. For FASA, the buyers are usually the legal departments and like the procurement is always involved, but legal tends to be the buyer, the economic buyer, but engineering tends to be the ones that ultimately have to implement it, right? Like software engineers have to deploy the product and get value from it. Legal buys it for compliance reasons and do as a CYA, right? And so involving those engineers in the final closing stages is a lot more, it will have a lot better outcomes down the line, because that way they won't feel like this is something that's being crammed down their throats. They're not seeing it after the fact. They're involved in the final decision-making process. That is definitely a better approach than just surprising people.
I'm curious, since you brought that up, having so many non-technical buyers involved and who make that buying and renewal decision in there. How do you approach things differently when you have a very technical product? So you've got to be able to create technical value, but prove business value and have those mixed discussions. What have been some of the challenges around that? What are some things you found that work really well?
The reality is I'm just getting started here at FASA. So I don't actually know exactly what that will look like just yet, but I have some hunches, right? Because looking back at PDL and also Kent, a lot of times the economic justification did have to happen more so with the finance departments, right? It wasn't so much legal there, but they had to show proof. Now, the space was a little different, because at Kentic, at least, we could always say, if you don't monitor your environment, you don't know what's going on, you might be missing a lot of things that, are either bad or that could be improved, or, hey, we're really doing well over here, and thus being able to show value that way. So the ROI was always like, hey, this is like a CYA to some extent, but also here's a way to identify future opportunities and maybe some cost-cutting measures or expansion into new markets. What I think is going to be really interesting here at FASA, we have obviously the compliance piece. So what we do is you install this into your CI/CD and your development pipeline. We will then scan your code base and make sure that you're compliant from a license perspective against all open source licenses that you might use. And every software company these days, whether they know it or not, is using some sort of open source, right? And so that's the first part. But then the second part, and this is becoming more and more prevalent, is around security, right? A lot of these open source projects have zero-day vulnerabilities all the time. Unless you subscribe to every single one of them on GitHub or in the respective websites, you're not going to know about that. And so the value there is that proactive notification to both the engineers, right? So they can actually take mitigating steps earlier on, but also to legal and compliance, so they know what might be coming down the line, right? Okay, is this possibly a giant leak potential for us? And so do we need to start PR early? Do we need to have communications out? Because a lot of this is now also a matter of just government reporting, right? More and more is happening in that space. It is going to be an interesting challenge, right? But I think this product at least speaks to both the engineers, because it makes their job easier and it gives them peace of mind, but also to legal and compliance, who is ultimately the economic buyer from an insurance perspective.
When you're building up an organization in CS, then in a more technical organization, what kind of people do you look for? Are they very experienced? Are they earlier in their career? And then and this is always a challenge, but how do you find the right mix of technical, business, and customer focused skills? Because that, you said earlier in the intro, there's ways of doing it, but it's challenging to get that right balance. And when you've got someone who's naturally more technical, it makes it more challenging. We're really interested in kind of a couple of questions there for you.
Yeah, and my thinking on this has evolved over the last 5 to 10 years. It used to be much more common to try and find sort of one person that could do all of these things and then just scale that one person to a sizable team. We did this a little bit at Kentic and also at People Data Labs in the past. And you end up with sort of CSMs that are also more technical to some extent, but then you also still had to have what we would call customer success engineers that were like purely technical, but could also talk to customers to some extent. And they would work in tandem. So a CSM and a CSE would work with the given account base and ensure that they're delivering value there. I think it's become increasingly more difficult to try and find customer success engineers that are also really polished and able to talk to customers. And they're also becoming a lot more expensive, which I think that's just the way that the market's going. And then on the CSM side, finding folks that are like able to map the account, have those relationships and so forth, but then also be able to sell to some extent and negotiate renewals and find upsell opportunities, and actually be able to run a call and hold their own in certain minimally technical situations is tough. And so what I'm thinking might be the future here is to specialize more early on. A lot of companies do this at scale. They'll have like CSMs that are purely non-technical, and they are the account manager. And then they'll have implementation engineers, and they only work on the implementation side. And they may have a project manager that may be working only during certain parts of the customer lifecycle. And then, of course, they'll have a renewal specialist or an upsell, cross-sell specialist that comes in when those situations open up. And so that's usually something you can do at scale. But I'm thinking about doing this earlier on, especially in this kind of company where the engineers tend to be developers, like they've written code, they live in GitHub, they understand all that. You may only need one or two of those, right, for a given startup to cover your entire customer base until you have several hundred customers, and then have one or two really strong CSMs to be the account managers, and maybe one renewal specialist, upsell specialist that kind of helps out. That's the thinking I have. As you think about all of that, though, in an earlier stage startup, it's hard to hire people that have no experience, especially on the engineering side. You have to have a base level understanding of what's going on. And you can start making some bets and bring on some more junior folks as you have established a team. But making a complete blind bet early on and just hoping might set you back too far. So for now, we'll focus on people that have done this before and that have a couple of years experience. But as we get bigger, there'll be promotion paths and even bringing in folks that have never done customer success before.
I like that. And I think that really makes logical sense. As you start, you've got to get those right people in. How do you go about, if you can't find the right skills in the team and experiences that you want, particularly when you're early stage startup, how do you go about building those skills and developing those skills? Who do you see as the most important first hires?
Yeah, so I think what's good about customer success is there's a fairly established community at this point, especially on the CSM side, right? Anybody that's more on the account management side of things, there's resources out there. There's Success Hacker, there's the various CS platforms. Like Gainsight has a really good program. Catalyst has a customer success coaching program, and so forth, where you can both do some recruiting, right, for folks that are early in their career, but also help existing folks that you may have on the team that you may have inherited to get some coaching and some additional resources from the outside. On the engineering side, I think this might be controversial, but I'm a big believer in hiring some folks from your customers, right? If you find a super fan or two, like that's on the engineering side in some of your customers, and it's not going to be a detriment to that customer's business, try to recruit them over because they already love your product, most likely, otherwise they probably wouldn't be talking to you about that. And they might be willing to take that risk to come to a smaller startup and really accelerate things. We were very successful at doing that at Kentic. Two folks actually came over from existing customers, and they're still there. They're still some of the best engineers that I ever hired over there. Shout out to Dan Kelly and Dustin Baer, who were the ones that did that. And so that's another avenue of approach that you can take.
Cool. I'm curious talking to you as well too. So if you've had very technical customers with engineering backgrounds and skills and all that knowledge, what is it that they actually want from a CS team? Where does it they need help and that they can't do for themselves? And other than technical support, what is it? Are they looking for subject matter expertise in the field? Are they looking for additional technical expertise in customer success? Are they looking just air cover with their internal business users? What's the goal there?
Yeah, so again, I think it depends on the product. What I do know at FASA, a lot of our time will be spent early on in the implementation onboarding cycle, because unless you implement and are in the CI/CD, in the development pipeline, there's no way for the product to work, right? And there's a number of things that just have to happen, that have to be configured, that have to be set up, and that have to happen both on our end and on the customer's end in order for that to be true. And a lot of that happens early on, but then later on, it's about just making sure those things continue to work over time. At Kentic, similarly, we had that as well, where that product, you would send data from your devices and then it would do a bunch of analysis and you would be able to use it in the UI and APIs and so forth. But in order to get that set up, you had to configure protocols on your routers and switches in order to export that data. Some customers knew exactly what to do, and those were the easy ones, but the vast majority of them required some sort of hand-holding, right? Every router and switch has a slightly different software version. The commands might be slightly different. Having the expertise to know that difference and being able to help customers along that. And then also, and it sounds silly, but a lot of times you have to overcome some compliance concerns on the customer side. What do you mean? You're going to send metadata about all of our network traffic out to some cloud provider, right? Is that safe? Can you help me understand that? And that's actually a challenge we'll be seeing here at FOSSA more and more so as well, because not everybody uses GitHub and GitLab in the cloud to do that development. Some people have that on-prem, right? So there's a unique set of challenges to come with that. Once you've passed the onboarding piece, though, it's all about showing customers, hey, this is the business value that we actually found. Like, you have so many vulnerabilities that we've identified. You're out of compliance for these software licenses. Here's our recommendation as a vendor who's done this hundreds of times with other customers on how to remediate them. And so that's truly where the power of customer success will come in. And that's more down the line, because you've got to get through the onboarding piece. But that's when you become truly a consultant and an advisor to your customers.
Very cool. Very cool. So I'm also wondering then, in such a technical environment, you mentioned sometimes they're doing implementation work, sometimes it changes after the implementation's live. How do you draw a distinction between customer success and customer service and support type piece? And where do you draw those lines? And even just internally, how do you need to manage your teams and workload differently?
Yeah, so interestingly, again, it depends, right? At Kentic, it was, when I was still there, it was all under my umbrella. We had support. We had one person that ran the reactive break fix inbound ticket queue, and then everybody else was more proactive. Similarly, at People Data Labs, we shared the support queue between myself and my technical services manager. And there wasn't a lot of support cases that came in, and everything else was more on the proactive side. Here at FOSSA, we have a separate support team right now that actually reports in under the product leadership. That may be the way that we keep that down the line. It may eventually move under me. I don't know what that will look like yet. But ultimately, it is distinctive workflows, but it tends to be the same value space, right? Me as a customer, like, I have an issue right now. I want to have that resolved. What's the most natural thing to do is I'm going to reach out to my customer success manager. You as the company may not want that. They may want them to go through a certain process, but ultimately you're trying to make that as easy as possible for your customer. I think the differentiator, though, is it proactive? Are we helping a customer achieve a certain outcome? Then it's customer success. Is it reactive, as in, hey, I found this issue, I'm going to tell you about that and I expect a resolution? That's more service or support. But at the end of the day, you really are there to help the customer resolve their concerns and to get value from what you're providing them.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Also, as I'm listening to you, I'm wondering, in the more technical companies where everyone has to have some technical chops behind them there as well too, how do you work with your internal leadership and executives to communicate the value of CS internally? Do they instinctively get it, or is this a big sell for them? Because I know, like, in a lot of front office facing applications, there's obviously a lot of folks who don't have the technical skills and interest, but have a lot of business acumen. And sometimes in more technical companies, you get some of the leadership who are very tech forward.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one. I always look at, when I evaluate companies, like, how did the CEO or like one of the co-founders grow up in terms of like their career journey? We were super fortunate at Kentic with Avi Friedman, who had been the CTO of Akamai for the better part of a decade, had run other internet service providers, and built the first ISP in Philadelphia. He's a nerd's nerd, as we used to say. And so, like, he got it, and he was a big proponent of making sure that customers get technical value. And it was never really a question. PDL was a little bit different. The idea there was like, hey, we don't actually know what will work yet. We'll just build a bunch of products and see which ones work for our customers. And guess what? This data product ended up being the one that took off. And both of the co-founders there were more on the business side of things. And it became a little bit more of a challenge, but we were able to bring in a lot of other early on in the company to be champions of the technical side of things. Our CEO, and it's actually a solo founded company, which is unusual, but also a nice challenge to see, is more on the technical side. So he understands the problem space of open source and the compliance and security aspects from a technical side. So I think we'll have a lot less concerns around the technical value there. I think where the challenge will lie is the account management aspect of that, and really making sure that we're not just focusing on the technical things, because I think we're doing that reasonably well, but also making sure that we don't lose champions. We understand like the customer's business, the macroeconomic impacts of what might be happening, the overall shift in, say, the economy. For instance, every company these days is a tech company to some extent, right? If you're a car manufacturer, like it may not be apparent, but guess what? More and more car software also relies on open source, right? And having that wherewithal and that understanding, I think, is critical when it comes to taking care of the customer as a whole versus just the technical pieces.
Cool. Great. Thank you.
Do you find what's kind of sponsors of your customers and the feedback from your customers? Is it working? Is the model working when you're speaking, having these technical conversations? Does the model of customer success in a technical organization work?
So in perfect fairness, I am literally just starting here at Fossa. So I don't have the answers to that yet. I think going back to both People Data Labs and Kentic, I would say a lot of times yes, it does work, because we would make sure that the technical value as well as the business value that somebody had signed up for was being delivered. I might now be missing part of the question, so I'm lost in my own thoughts here, but does that answer it?
It does, yeah. I'm just curious, because the majority of customer success is probably on the more non-technical side. And I think it's quite easy to equate success for customers there, but the outcomes and value that we're doing from a technical point of view can be very different. I'm just curious into how you've seen the success of customer success in more technical organizations.
Got it. I think so there's always a business outcome that somebody wants when they buy your software or they buy your product. And a lot of times, yes, it can be just like a front end thing, and that's fine. And it can be relatively easy to explain that. And in those cases, like you can just get away with just having a CSM run the whole thing. Where it's different is if what you're providing, like in order to get the business value from it, you have to have a certain level of technical implementation happen, or it may even be very complex, right? Like going back to the People Data Labs for a second, there wasn't a UI. Like the UI was very limited. It just told you how many API calls you made and what your API keys were, and maybe some other stats, right? Everything else that we did was in the data, right? So you would either do API calls, which would give you the value, and you had to implement them into your product in order to look up people or extract other information, or we would deliver it as a giant flat file into some cloud storage, and then you as a customer would have to download that into your data pipeline and implement it, right? And so that itself is a very technical task, right? Because you have to make sure that you're parsing in a certain way, like you're cleaning the data a certain way, you're storing it a certain way, and so forth. And in order to ultimately get to the business outcome, which may be like, hey, I want to build this app and I want to do these things and I need this data for that, you had to do all the technical steps. And so in cases like that, of course, you have to make sure that it works technology-wise. It's interesting. The customers that would fail at that company were the ones that were trying to outsource all of the technical development, right? They're like, hey, we're buying this. We understand it's a technical product, but we're going to outsource all of the technical work to some third-party developer. And 9 chances out of 10 is that wouldn't work, because those people were not bought into the mission of the customer the same way as, say, the founders were. And so I think that's like proof that you have to overcome those technical implementation challenges.
Wow, that's interesting stuff. Thank you so much for being with us. We're just about out of time here. I really appreciate you sharing your experiences and insights. Before we go, we always like to ask a bold challenge question. And this one for you is, what's the single most important action that a leader of a technical CS team should take to ensure that their team is delivering a high impact CS service? So if you're leading a technical team as the leader, what's the most important thing for you to do?
I think you don't need to be the smartest person in the room, but you need to be able to understand what your technical folks are talking about. And you need to be able to challenge them on some of their assumptions and thinking. So I like to think of it this way: just know enough to be dangerous, but don't be the smartest guy in the room.
I like it.
That's great advice. Great advice. Before we go, we want to invite you, as all of our guests, if you would like to share a shameless plug for your projects, yourself, your background, anything of interest, any outside activities that you're really interested in, please just go ahead and tell our audience what's of interest to you and how they can get in touch with you if they have questions.
Yeah, sounds good. The get in touch part is easy. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can just look me up there, Manuel Harnisch, and send me a message there. or mharnisch@topsurf.info. That's another quick way to get a hold of me. In terms of shameless plug, I am super excited to be starting here at Fossa. And so like this is going to be all about Fossa. If you use any sort of open source software in your development pipeline, if you're building big projects, if you're going through digital transformation, you should seriously take a look at what we can provide, not only from a security perspective, but also from a compliance perspective. Relatively easy to get started, get implemented, and then to derive value from the products that down the line. The way I try to explain this to people that aren't in the industry is like, it's like buying insurance, right? Like you buy life insurance with the hopes that you'll never need it, but guess what? If you do need it, it's there. So think of it from that point of view. And that's just for the compliance piece. The security piece is obviously a lot more day to day. So yeah, that's the shameless plug.
It's such the background there, talking through kind of the technical side of it, Manuel, is just great, because I think platforms and products are getting more technical, particularly when you look at big enterprise solutions, big organizations, and you need to understand how we get that break and what's the right thing to do. And those examples you've talked through, I think, are really useful and quite different from a lot of how a lot of us deal with customer success. So a really insightful conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.